Hello, I'm Michael Marsh, and welcome to the program dedicated to reestablishing constitutional government, first in Oregon, and hopefully we'll set a good enough example that the rest of the United States will reestablish their constitution as well. But in order to have a constitutional government, the Constitution's actually on the books still. You know, they haven't done away with it. But we need people that are in office that actually know that there's a Constitution and care about it. And that's why I have my guest, Jodi, who's a state representative, House District 19 here in Oregon, as my guest. And Jodi, this is your first term as a legislature. How'd you like it?
I actually liked it very well. I enjoyed my time there. I have to say I'm glad that we have a break now. It was definitely a long session, but I really did enjoy it. I took the time to really build some good relationships, and you know, I went into the session with not a lot of things on my plate to do. I really went into the session to learn, and that's what I set out to do, and that's what I did. So I dove in with both feet, and I'm an old coach, and so I was there to learn the playbook, and that's what I did.
So what are some things that you've learned?
Well, let's see. I learned that relationships are extremely important. I think that, you know, and that happens with a lot of things we do in life. I think relationships really are the foundation of a lot of the work that we do, regardless of whether it's a legislature or it's business or it's personal. So relationships are extremely important. I think a lot of what we do there is knowing what's coming and learning to adapt and be quick on your feet. Things happen extremely quick, and as the session progressed, I found that things moved faster and faster. You have to be able to count on your colleagues, and building relationships is extremely important in that. There's only so much a person can really take in, and you've got to be able to know who you can trust and who's really smart and articulate in other areas that you may not be able to spend enormous amounts of time in. You know, there's so many committees and so many different directions that you're pulled in that you've got to count on those folks. And so I learned to be pretty intuitive on that. I learned to spend my time wisely. I learned that you can learn a whole lot in 15 minutes. Our appointments are set in 15-minute increments throughout the day. And so when you're not in committee, you are literally seeing someone every 15 minutes. And surprisingly enough, I learned that, you know, I can switch topics every 15 minutes, but there were a few times that I honestly had to step out and tell the staff, you know, I just need 5 minutes to catch some wind, some air, and regroup, and just to recognize that I needed to do that, because I really wanted to be thoughtful, and I really wanted to take the time to learn and really listen and understand what it was that the issues were, and then too, it was taking the time to really read the emails that came from constituents, take the time to make those phone calls and reach out to people that I represented to say, hey, these are the issues that are coming in front of us. Can you come in and see me? The beauty of being right here and having my district, you know, with South Salem, Almsville, and Turner, I have the ability to reach out to people and they can come in and see me. Watching other folks, they didn't have that as much as I did, and so I really took advantage of that. So I was really thankful that I could do that. So I learned right away, you know, who I can get on the phone to really quickly and who can rally people to come in and talk with me about the important issues, and those people that I could reach out to in the community that could then go out and talk to more people and bring back things to me that I could then relay to the legislature and talk to people about what was important.
So would you say that you voted yes more often or no more often in this last session?
I would say, you know, I really thought I would go in and vote no a whole lot, but there was quite a few times we voted yes, and there was a lot of us that did. You know, but a lot of those things are budget driven and policy driven. I think I really was conscientious about voting no on the votes that really counted. You know, and there was a couple of times, I'll be honest, that I may have voted yes myself, but because my constituents were not in favor of a vote, I didn't vote that way. And so, you know, it's looking at it as a whole and saying, okay, one, what's best for Oregon, and two, how do the people that you represent feel? And taking the time to really read through the emails and listening to the phone calls and talking to people is so important. And not forgetting, you know, every day I drove into that Capitol underneath, I really truly thought about that.
I know there were several bills that were pretty anti-family.
Yeah.
Like one was trying to take away the right of parents to make their own decisions about whether their children should be vaccinated or not. How did that turn out?
Well, it didn't end up going as well as they had anticipated in the beginning, which I'm very glad, because I was not supportive of that, and I had a huge outpouring again from constituents. You know, and I was thankful for that, because personally I don't believe that you take that right away from parents. You know, parents know what's best for their children, and I've got some personal family history in that regard too that's near and dear to my heart, and so that would have been a really tough one for me, but I stood in opposition of that very heavily. Good. And you know, that's up to a parent to choose, and when government doesn't have a right to parent somebody's children. And so I stood against that one. I also stood against really heavily the bill which it passed, unfortunately, that allows children to be treated by physicians without parents having the explanation of benefits sent home. I disagree with that. I don't think that...
They're also, in that one, didn't they also make it so that the parents are still paying for the treatment?
Yep, parents are still responsible for paying for the treatment, but they can't know what the treatment is. And when you have a situation where there is a health clinic at a school, it could very easily end up being a 6-year-old child that goes in to see a provider at a school clinic, and that provider says, you know, I think you should see a specialist, and that child could be sent to a specialist and the parent never even notified. And that's not okay, you know, and I argued the point on the floor. That was probably one of my most heartfelt, heated arguments, because I said, you know, 2 weeks before that we had a discussion about how parents should have a say in whether or not their children have to be assessed in school. It was all about the over-testing of students. And we had this debate, and we were all pretty much on the same side of parents should have the right to opt their children out of testing. So it was okay to do that, but then 2 weeks later we're saying that parents aren't smart enough or shouldn't be able to say whether or not their children should be treated medically. And the argument was that in case there's, in a case of abuse, then the parent may be the abuser, so therefore they shouldn't know. Well, there's already federal statute out there that takes care of that, that says that the physician can make that call and say, we're not going to send this information home to the parent if the parent is the abuser, or if there is a case of abuse. So it was a complete overreach, should have never happened, and you know, that was one piece of legislation that just really went to the core of me and really tore away at the family values that we so strongly, you know, hold near and dear to our hearts. And it was very, very sad.
And in that one, they're pretty vague about what kind of treatment the kid can have. I mean, they could just about have anything, couldn't they?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And
yeah.
So, you know, they can go in and have an abortion, or...
Yep.
And parents not know that they're even in a sexual relationship, much
exactly
less
right.
having the abortion.
And that was an example that I had actually said on the floor, was an example of, you know, I'd been a coach for years, and I had a student that had confided in me and had been in an abusive relationship, and had that explanation of benefit not been sent home to her parents, and her parents had seen that she had been to a doctor. It was a really good family, a great kid. She'd contracted an STD out of a an abusive relationship. Her parents would have had no idea. And it was enough to strike a conversation that they were then able to have with their daughter, and they were able to help her and get her out of that abusive situation. But had that explanation of benefit not come home, and because he took her to the doctor, they didn't even know. She was over 15, so they could do that. And had that not happened, they would not have been able to intervene. And so I challenged my colleagues across the aisle with, you know, what makes one victim more important than another? Because in this case, she was a victim. And if you're going to step in and take that away from a parent and their ability to intervene, you continue to create, you're helping one victim to create another. And I said, what makes one victim more important than another? And this is just not okay. And it was heartbreaking. And there were several that actually came up to me afterwards, and a few of them were even in tears and said, you know, I agree with what you're saying, but they still voted the other way.
Democrat Party line.
It was.
That is very sad.
Yep, it was very sad.
Now, speaking of Democratic Party line, the Senate, I guess it was last night, they tried to do away with funding from Planned Parenthood. Mm. Now, I think Oregon has gives out grants to Planned Parenthood also, the state of Oregon. Do you think that will be an issue in the short session coming up?
Well, I know I received word today that I'm being asked to sign on a letter that a group of Republican legislators are asking that Planned Parenthood be investigated and here in the state of Oregon. And so, you know, I know that that will definitely be in the works. And so, you know, we're gonna have to see what happens with that. So, you know, I don't know what will happen in the short session. I think something, you know, is probably necessary to happen there, but we'll have to wait and see.
Of course, myself, I'd kind of like to see all government funding for abortion be eliminated anyway. I mean, why am I paying for it again?
I know. Yeah.
So, what else did you learn in this session that will?
Well, I was, you know, and there was a lot of bad things that went on, but there was a lot of good things too. Again, like I said, the relationship building and those things were good, and I ended up getting some bills passed through that were really good. I was really disappointed that the impeachment bill didn't happen, because I was really, I really thought that would happen, given the fact that it was such a bipartisan bill. I mean, we had signatures from both sides, the Senate, the House. It passed with flying colors on the House side. And I'd worked with the governor, I had worked with the majority leaders, and, you know, we pulled in retired Supreme Court judges, we had a constitutional law lawyer from Willamette, and, you know, we really worked hard on that. And so when it got to the Senate side and President Courtney decided that it wasn't going to go anywhere, I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, what? You know, when Oregon's the only state that doesn't have an ability to do that, I was really taken aback by that. So I was disappointed in that. And, you know, I think that Kitzhaber was still pretty raw to him, and I went and met with him and we talked. You know, a couple things came up with that. He said he didn't really feel like Oregon had corruption. I politely disagreed, given what's just happened, and you know, and we had the whole CRC, and there's been, anyway, that could be a whole other show.
Yeah.
But and then he also said that, you know, we had the recall. Well, the whole recall process, as you well know, would have taken us a year almost before we could have ever done anything with that. And you could have a governor or anybody in the executive branch go through an entire legislative session before you could ever remove them. And there's a lot of damage that could be done in an entire legislative session. So I told him I really didn't feel that the recall process was an adequate process, and that we really needed to have the impeachment process. So he said that was done, I think, in 1908 or 1915. They had introduced an impeachment, and it was voted down, and they did the recall process instead. And I said, well, with all due respect, women couldn't vote then, and I think maybe it's time to take another look at that. So he agreed he'd take another look in February. It'll be interesting to see if that comes back with my name on it or if it has a D behind it. At this point, to be honest, I really don't care. It's not about me. It's really about what's most important for Oregon. And what's most important for Oregon is that we're protected and that our citizens are protected in case something like this ever happens again. So it's good policy, and I just want to see that happen. So it doesn't matter to me. I'm on a committee that is working on the ethics issues, because there was some other really good ethics reform that didn't happen, that really shouldn't have been a partisan issue, and it ended up being that way. So we'll see what happens with that. You know, I was disappointed that the low carbon fuel standards came through.
Yeah,
and
wasn't that part of the corruption?
well, you know, I'm disappointed that that happened, because Oregonians, you know, we're left with a gas tax, yet we have no improvements to roads.
Yeah.
And we certainly have some issues relative to a transportation package that need to be addressed. And when you talk about carbon emissions, just drive up to Portland and sit in traffic for an hour, and you want to solve our carbon emissions problems, we need a transportation package. I don't believe the fix is in low carbon fuel standards that they've proposed. And so, you know, we stuck together, and we kept Oregonians from having to pay twice at the pump. And it's unfortunate, because we had a repeal. They agreed to a repeal. They agreed to a repeal and replace. And at the last minute, that deal fell apart. And so we're left without a transportation package, and we're left with low carbon fuels that, in all honesty, we're going to pay at the pump, but you're not going to get the benefit of that.
Well, the whole thing was so that, well, Kitzhaber's girlfriend was making a lot of money from an out-of-state corporation to push this bill. So one has to wonder who else was getting paid by this out-of-state corporation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is it, Tom Stryker or something that's behind all this?
Tom, is it Stryker? I don't know. But it's, you know, and the sad thing is we can't, the research says you can't accomplish what it is that they're saying we can do. And so to pay the amount of money that you're going to pay at the pump, you know, 19 cents to over $1, again, without anything going to roads, is just not good policy. It's just not good.
No. You mentioned the CRC, Columbia River Crossing. Mm-hmm. Are they going to try to bring that up again?
I certainly have not heard that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I have not heard that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody outside of some small group of business people up in Portland want that, do they?
Yeah, I don't think so.
That's good.
They're focusing on that new convention center they're building up there now, you know. What did we put, 10, I think we gave them at least 10 million or something for that, which I did not. I was one of the only ones that didn't vote for that. I didn't want it to interfere with the convention center we've got here. We're doing such great things with that I was concerned about that.
So, what percentage of the money that Oregon taxpayers pay out, you know, speaking of which, actually go to Portland? How much comes to the rest of the state?
That's a good question. I do not have an answer to that, but that's a good question. You know, I am working on putting a coalition together that we're going to call the Rest of Oregon. And it's a group that is the eastern side of our state, the southern, central, the rest of Oregon, basically. And it's not to go against Portland. It's going to be to really mobilize the rest of our state to get people heard and to get a voice for those folks, because they really don't feel like they're heard. And that's another thing that I really learned this session One is that we've got to mobilize better. And I really was, it was an eye-opener for me to go to committee and see how we weren't represented. You know, a lot of times business wasn't represented as well as we could have been, and that was hard for me. But at the same time, when I talk to business owners, you know, they're busy running their businesses. And so we've got to come up with new and innovative ways to be able to get those folks there and have them heard. And two, when you talk about, you know, I grew up in Eastern Oregon, and you talk to those folks and they feel like they're not heard. Well, it's really difficult for them to travel all the way across our state to come and testify, and then they sit and wait all day, and it may be carried over to the next day. And so we've got to come up with some ways that enable everybody to have a voice. And so that's kind of what this coalition is set out to do. And I'm pretty excited about the work that we're going to do there.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Because Portland definitely is a controlling factor right now.
Yeah, and you know, it's right outside their back door. It's easy for them to mobilize, and so we've got to, the rest of Oregon has to be heard, which is why we're going to call it the rest of Oregon. And they've got to have a voice too, because they do matter. And you know, the folks right here in the Willamette Valley and Salem and Almsville and Turner and over Central and Southern Oregon and Eastern. So, and I think once those folks are mobilized, you know, when you're in numbers, you're heard. But at the, you know, there's an old saying: if you're not at the table, you're what's for dinner.
Yeah.
And they've got to be at the table. So I'm going to work on that pretty hard.
So, do you think there's much chance of some of the really damaging bills that came out of the last session are being repealed? You know, like we already talked about the carbon fuels thing. There were a couple, and the taking away the parents' right to know what's being done to their children medically. There were a couple others, the universal gun control law, and so is there much chance of any of that being overturned in the next session? Or?
You know, in the short session, I'd love to say yes, but I don't know. I think it's going to take us winning some seats and changing some of the tide for that to happen. I really do. Otherwise, I think it's going to be pretty difficult for that to happen.
You're probably right.
Yeah. And I think, you know, a short session to come in with a transportation package and to do a repeal, you know, you never say never, but I think it would be pretty difficult. You know, and then you've got an election cycle coming, so that's on everybody's minds too. And unfortunately, I think that drives people, and that's sad because it really shouldn't. But that's something else I learned, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
You know, that's something I have to tell you I really don't like. You need to be there because you have a job to do, not because you have an election to run. And I'll be there as long as I'm called to be there, and that's as long as I'll be there.
Okay. Which reminds me, are you planning to stay a representative the whole your political career, or you got other offices in mind?
You know, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, like I said, I'll keep doing this as long as I'm called to and the people want me there. And I honestly just feel humbled, and like I said, I drive in that under that parking structure every day, and I, you know, it's heavy. You know, it's a responsibility that you carry, and I just want to do a good job, and as long as I can do that, I'll be there and keep doing it.
Okay, sounds good. What new issues, or have they made up their mind about what they're going to be doing in the short session?
Well, it's supposed to be a lot of the budget kind of stuff, you know, but we each get 2 bills, and so it'll probably be a bit of a free-for-all, I'm sure. But as far as an agenda, I haven't heard, you know, a whole lot. Like I said, I'm on the Ethics Reform Committee, and there's a lot of work sessions, work groups, which I, you know, not knowing any better, when I saw all these work groups come out, I kept thinking, you know, this is a crazy amount of work. Is this normal? And in talking with people, they said, no, this is not normal. And so there's a lot of work groups. And so I know that we're going to spend a lot of time hearing and hopefully, all that reporting back on all the work that's been done in this short amount of time. We'll spend some time hearing about that. And then the decisions have to be made on the work, that was done and the reporting that comes back.
Yeah, I should point out that the work sessions are not, well, I guess the public is allowed to watch, but
on the work with the work groups,
participate.
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm sure anybody could. Yeah, we just had in fact, we just got emailed a whole list of all the work groups that are being put together so that the work can get done. There's a lot, and a lot of those too are done internally by departments, and so the departments will do the work, and then they'll come and report back to us too. And I'm sure that'll drive some of the legislation that happens in the short session too. Yeah. Okay,
we've got about 2 minutes. Anything that hasn't been said that you would like to say?
I don't think so. I just appreciate you having me on, and I think next time maybe we do this, we'll talk a little bit about. I was asked, one of 10 women in the nation. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about that before.
No.
To serve on it's called Right Women Right Now. It's a national group of women that are traveling, and what we're doing is promoting the party and really promoting women in politics, and just reaching out to not only just women but the younger population and minorities that haven't served before. And so I was pretty excited to do that. And so I'm one of 10.
Wow, we should have. I wish I had known that earlier. I would have been one of the questions.
Yeah, so maybe we'll do this again, and we can talk a little bit more about what that's going to look like, and kind of what I'm doing with that. I just got back from Boston, and spent some time talking about a lot of the issues and the things that are coming our way nationally. So I'm going to be doing a lot of work outside of Oregon, in hopes of bringing some of that back to Oregon. And the national group is focusing more on Oregon than they have before, which is good news.
And speaking of national, are you supporting any of the presidential candidates?
I haven't decided yet.
I like 3 of the Republican candidates. I like Scott Walker, I like Rand Paul, and I like Carly. I better not say her last name, I'll spell it wrong.
Well, I'm guilty of, when we have elections, I go, are you kidding me? Is this all we have to choose from? And now I'm looking at 16 going, what are we doing? So I have to say I'm guilty. I'm one of those that it's my fault too. Yeah, but I don't know yet.
Okay.
I really don't.
I'm glad you came on, and
Thanks for having me.
Forward to the next session we do.
Yeah.
Thank you.